The title of this video, as you no doubt saw before clicking on it, is Why is Master Chief's helmet important for his character? Believe it or not, the answer isn't what you'd expect. It's not to preserve the mystery of his appearance, not entirely. It's also not about keeping his character a fairly blank slate so that the player can inject their personality onto him, at least not anymore. It goes beyond that. It's a bit deeper. In case you didn't know, we've actually seen the Chief's face on several occasions. In the Fall of Reach animated series, we see him when he was a young man, and the legendary ending of Halo 4 also granted us a brief peek at his eyes. So what's the deal? Why does he always keep his helmet on, and why is it so significant? In order to answer these questions, we'll have to ask a few other questions first. Chief of which, get it? Why does he wear his helmet in the first place? Well, for obvious reasons, and not so obvious reasons too. During a firefight, his helmet offers him additional protection, shielding his head from projectiles by wrapping it in a comfy coating of a near-impervious titanium alloy. Later models of Mjolnir armor offer even more protection in the form of energy shielding, allowing the user the comfort of knowing that many bullets will either bounce away, or in the case of plasma-based projectiles, their high levels of heat will be dispelled before making contact with the user's body. His helmet, when combined with the rest of his armor, creates a vacuum seal that also functions as a sort of environment suit, capable of filtering out toxins, gases, and even parasitic flood spores. It can also allow the user to withstand the dangers of space, lock to prevent movement during a great fall, and even place the user into an extended state of hibernation not too dissimilar from cryosleep. On top of that, his helmet has an integrated screen of sorts that overlays a HUD, or heads-up display, which communicates key pieces of information to him at a mere glance. Things like ammo capacity, grenade count, available equipment, shield strength, radar, targeting reticles, and objective indicators. When equipped, the helmet also allows for integration with a smart AI, thereby increasing combat effectiveness even more. Two heads are better than one, as they say. But everything I've mentioned so far is strictly from a practical usage standpoint. What if I told you his helmet serves additional purposes beyond that? In order to understand what those are, we first have to delve far back into the Chief's past to better understand his mind and the psychology behind why he actually prefers to wear his helmet in most instances. As you may already be aware, at the ripe old age of 6, John, who would eventually become Master Chief, was abducted by a woman named Dr. Halsey, currently working for a human governmental body known as ONI. They needed children for a top-secret clandestine military project codenamed Orion 2, eventually redubbed Spartan 2. John, along with 74 other exceptional children, were to be transformed into super soldiers, the pinnacle of strength for a human being. In order to achieve this, they were forced to participate in rigorous training regimens. These tasks would have been difficult for even a full-grown adult, let alone a small child. When they weren't training physically, they were being taught battle strategies and other pertinent information as a form of schooling. Somehow, being stolen from their families and indoctrinated into the military wasn't even the worst aspect of this entire process, though. Once their bodies had matured enough and they reached the age of 14, they would undergo violent and highly experimental augmentation surgeries that would cause them immense pain even upon success. If they failed, and there was a high probability of failure, their bodies would become twisted and deformed, or worse yet, they would die an absolutely agonizing death. If they succeeded, however, the children would become unbelievably strong, and with this newfound strength came the ability to wear Mjolnir armor, easily making them the deadliest soldiers on any battlefield. Unfortunately, of the 75 children to be exposed to these procedures, many would be killed, and a lot of the survivors were left crippled. Once they were ready for the surgeries, the children had been training for around 8 years. Remember, they were abducted at 6 and didn't undergo the augmentation procedures until around 14. So by this time, the Spartans had become a family. The other children, along with their instructor Mendez, Halsey, and any other employees that worked in the training facility, were the only people they ever really knew. John had become quite the leader at this point and had taken it upon himself to guide his fellow conscripts and closest friends to victory as best as he possibly could. This meant that whenever a Spartan was killed, their death weighed heavily on his mind, and not just because he loved them, but because he often felt responsible for their deaths. Even in the case of the augmentation failures, something that was completely and totally beyond his control, he still felt partly responsible for each fallen comrade, as if he could have done a better job at leading them, somehow enabling them to survive what essentially amounted to a game of chance. This was only just the beginning of his hardships, though. They hadn't even discovered the Covenant yet, and when they did, their conflict with them would bring humanity to the brink of extinction. It became up to John, the other Spartans, and any other brave soldiers to save their entire species. Over the course of this long and arduous war, the Spartans had already experienced so many atrocities, and thanks to the ongoing conflict, they suffered more and more each day, causing severe mental trauma. Okay, with that all established, now you have a basic idea of the headspace that John is often in. He's somewhat socially awkward because he hardly ever has the opportunity to interact with civilians. He was separated from his parents when he was only 6. He stood there helplessly as many of his brothers and sisters in arms were brutally killed. The threat of human extinction constantly looms over him. Regular soldiers often deify him, and he's never been taught how to handle any emotions that stem from these incredibly complex situations. Guilt, survivor's guilt, post-traumatic stress, depression, anxiety, the constant fear of the death of his loved ones, and the weight of saving humankind on his shoulders are just a sample of the things this man deals with on a regular basis. That doesn't even take into consideration the things that surely happen to his mind thanks to military indoctrination, and to an extent, the attempted removal of any individuality that was caused by training him to be a soldier. He's a broken man in many ways, but don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to discount him. Anyone would be damaged when faced with the things he has. All of this trauma, though, it's going to exact a heavy toll on the mind, regardless of how tough the person is. The Chief's helmet doesn't just offer him physical protection, but also emotional and mental protection too. If he's feeling particularly vulnerable, no one can see him. His helmet, his armor, it becomes a protective shell, a shell that he is able to retreat inside of if necessary. There's a moment in the book The Flood where Chief is instructed to leave his armor behind when reporting to a commander. He doesn't outwardly express discontent, but internally he thinks about how he hates to be separated from the suit, even in an area that was at least relatively safe. His armor had no doubt become a protective shell, a security blanket of sorts, and he'd only remove it in front of those he truly trusts. Part of what makes the Spartans so intimidating is the fact that you can't read their feelings by their expression. They don't need a poker face because any emotion they might illustrate is hidden from view. If they're scared, those around them would never know. Regular soldiers that look to Spartans for hope would never see the true sadness they might express. Needless to say, this is, in a way, good for morale. It makes Spartans appear unbreakable, making the average Joe feel hopeful. Enemies that may be attempting to provoke an emotional response in them would never be able to see it if they were successful unless the Spartan's helmet was removed. That's not to say that Spartans can't feel, though, and it certainly doesn't imply that they're unable to show emotion through things like body language or tone. As the viewer or player, we may not see John's face, but we don't need to. We understand how he feels because not only do we know him from experiencing his story, but we can see it based on his body language. Let's look at one of my favorite examples of this in the opening sequence of Halo Infinite. As Chief flings himself through space on his way to board a banished ship, he propels past several corpses. The banished bodies that get in his way, he removes quickly and carelessly, but when it comes time to move the body of a Marine, he's gentle and deliberate. His motions are slow and calculated. You can see that he's sad based on how he handles the fellow soldier. We can also tell how he's feeling based on the way he delivers a line. Tone and intonation can reveal a lot about a person's emotions. Listen to this dialogue, for example.
She said that to me once. About being a machine.
You can hear his sadness based on the way he speaks. We don't need to see his face to understand what he's going through. He just lost one of his best friends. We don't need to see him cry to know that he's devastated by this, because at this point in the story, we know him. We understand the character and we can empathize with how he feels. There's this absurd notion I've seen some people propagate on the internet that an audience is somehow incapable of connecting with a character when they're unable to see their face. If you're watching this, I don't think I need to tell you, but that is patently false. Literally any character, so long as they're written in an interesting way, can be loved. In some instances, being written well doesn't matter either, so long as the viewer's experience with the story was impactful in some way. Take Halo 3 ODST as an example. The Rookie is the very definition of a silent protagonist. He doesn't say a word throughout the entire game. Hell, he doesn't really have any motivations at all. He's hardly even a character. And yet people loved him, and they were livid when he was killed in the book New Blood. I can't deny it either. Despite the fact that I know nothing about him, his death saddened me greatly. We guided him throughout the streets of Mombasa and battled through many deadly situations. This creates a connection with the player or viewer because for all intents and purposes, we went through those struggles alongside him. Our time through ODST was impactful, and without this vessel, the Rookie, we never would have experienced what this beautiful game had to offer. A character's appearance or attire is irrelevant, and the Chief isn't the only example of this that proves that what I'm saying is true. The Doomslayer, Darth Vader, the Mandalorian, Samus, Isaac Clarke. These are just a few examples of characters that almost always wear their helmets that, without a doubt, connected with millions of people. So, why is the Master Chief's helmet important for his character? It's not only necessary from a practical in-universe standpoint, but it also acts as a safety net for the Chief, a wall with which to hide himself behind. It's also a symbol for those around him, a symbol of courage and dedication despite the incalculable odds that are against him. He wears it to hide, both physically and emotionally, but he also wears it to instill hope. Alright, that's all I've got. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm gonna go play some Halo.